Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. So let's get started. I am honored to have with me a gentleman I've known for 30 years now, maybe, Professor John Matsusaka from the University of Southern California. Good morning, John.
Morning for you. I guess what is it? Middle of the night for me.
Yeah, that's right. This I have to say that I've always this shows how much I love Americans when who will get up at the middle of the day, middle of the night, just to be on this show. So I really appreciate it, John. I really do.
Absolutely.
Um, so let's get started. Our conversation today is about what's happening in American universities and the domestic impact and the global impact. So just kind of tell us what's going on with universities in the United States under the new Trump era.
So there's a lot going on, and just maybe a little bit of where I'm coming from because it might be useful to say I've been a professor at American universities for 35 years or so now, I suppose, and I'm at University of Southern California right now. Spent big chunks of time at University of Chicago, at Stanford, at University of Washington, where I went. So I've seen all this terrain as a professor. I've also been administrator of various capacities as well. So I've seen all kinds of different pieces of it. So um, I think I'm pretty well aware of the sort of things that are going on. So I hope I can speak to some of these issues. So there's a lot of things going on. And one of the challenges, I think, as people write about it, is that um, all the things kind of get blurred together in everybody's mind. So let me go down the list. And I know lists can kind of be boring, but I think it's important for people to understand the different things that are going on. The first thing that was going on was the administration said that it wasn't going to fund, it wasn't going to allow what they call illegal DEI programs. So what that means is when they say that is that affirmative action in depending on what the word means is perfectly legal in the sense of if you're just trying to make sure you cast a broad net and so forth. What the administration's position is, backed up by recent Supreme Court rulings, is to say that you can you can try to increase diversity, but you cannot discriminate for or against people on the basis of race or on a whole bunch of other categories. So they're calling that DEI, but they're saying illegal DEI programs are no longer allowed. So that's the first thing that they said. That was one of the first things that they went out and did. And we can talk about how universities are responding, but let me just go down the list of things they're doing. Um, this is essentially forced universities to either uh, it, the simplest solution, which they've all done, is just change their names or back out of these areas a little bit, or they could try to fight it. They could actually try to fight it in court and say mine's not illegal. But that's number one. That's actually not the probably the biggest one that's most affecting universities. The biggest one that's most affecting universities is purely financial, and that is what's happened is that major research universities in this country over the last, I don't know, 50 years or maybe more post-war period have become heavily dependent on federal funding. Um, uh, Especially, the ones we think of as the most prestigious universities. Johns Hopkins, for example, has, I don't even know what it is, maybe a quarter of their budget or more is coming from the federal government. So what the administration is saying with regard to grants is two things. One is they're saying, well, we're gonna fund things that are our own priorities, and there's nothing new about that. Every incoming administration changes what it funds. The Biden administration wanted to fund more things having to do with climate change, having to do with impacts on minority groups and so forth. Trump guys, they don't want to fund that. They want to fund other things. So they're changing the funding priorities, and that's maybe normal. Um, what is not normal and what is the really big issue for universities is they're cutting back what's called overhead. So what the heck is this? So it's kind of an odd thing, but essentially, if you get money from the federal government, say to do a study, you wanna see if some drug helps patients recover from some disease, and you need to hire some lab assistants and buy materials and stuff. Let's suppose you need $100,000 for that. So you write a proposal to the federal government and you say, can you give me $100,000? And they say, yeah, here's $100,000. Go ahead. But there's also something called overhead. And so they add on top of that, they add a chunk of money. So it can be, on average, it's about 40%. So you ask for 100K, they give you $140,000. That other 40,000 gets taken by the central administration of the university to fund other things. And so that has become the idea is that's supposed to fund, you know, the buildings, the IT system, the securities, all the sort of basic stuff. But it goes well above and beyond that, And so now what's happening is the administration is saying we're going to cut those overheads from an average of, let's say, 40% down to 15%. So that's going to create immense holes in the budgets of these universities. So that is the really existential one. Let me just add briefly the two others, and we can talk more about these. The third thing that they're doing is kind of a collateral thing, but they're certainly getting very tough on the border, and they are trying to remove students who have been involved in protests or um, well, clearly they can't remove people for pure speech reasons, so they're having to come up with other articulations. But it kind of looks like people who become activists and so forth. That affects a relatively small number of students, but what we're seeing it's doing is it's making foreign students across the world hesitant to want to apply to come to program to take programs in the U.S. And one of the things that's happened to universities over the last 20 years or so is they've become heavily dependent on revenue from their master's programs, and a lot of those are students from overseas. So a lot of those students are now hesitating, and that's an uncertain. We'll have to see how the budget cycle goes, but that's kind of an uncertain thing about what that's going to do. Lastly, the last thing they're doing, again, it's very high profile, but it's probably not the main thing they're doing. They're very concerned about anti-Semitism at universities, and so they picked fights with a small number of very elite universities, Columbia, Harvard, Northwestern, and so forth. And they're essentially trying to cut off all their funding if they don't take some sort of extraordinary actions. So it's a whole bunch of different things that are going on. We can talk about why that's going on, but I think it's important for people to understand it's a bunch of different things.
Well, yeah, well, absolutely. There's so much going on. My brother is a professor at the University of Alabama, and he's even talking about the impact of just a wide variety of these things.
Everywhere.
And he hasn't been a professor as long as you, but just the impact is extreme. So let me ask you. I mean, there's so many things going on, as you said. So, as you know, this is an international show, and we have a lot of people who are students who watch this show. There at University of Southern California, I mean, I guess you're ending an academic year, right? The academic
Right.
year is about to end now. Yeah. Okay. So,
Right.
is it too soon to see if there's an impact on the number of international students coming in for next year, is for applying, or is that what's the cycle about knowing what the impact of international students is on the university?
Um, so we would know some things basically if we saw application data. So you'll get some hints of that. Um, but I haven't been tracking specifically our numbers. I'm not even sure they publicize that. So it's a little bit early, but everybody knows. Everybody just knows the inquiries, the talk. Everybody knows that there's going to be an issue there. So everybody's scrambling to see, can we substitute, say, American students for these international students? And different schools have different exposures. USC, we're here in Los Angeles. We're one of the highest percentages of international students of any university in the country, about 10%. So it's a huge part of our student body.
And the reason for the international students international students pay more than U.S. students, right? Is that one of the reasons that a lot of universities focus on international students?
Well, so we're a private university, so that doesn't really happen for us, but that will be the case for some state universities. No, it just turns out a lot of these students, a lot of the master's level students, they want to come to the United States. It's very good for their career. If you work in engineering or something, get a degree from a U.S. university. Maybe you can even work in the U.S. for a few years. It's a prestigious thing. You learn a lot of stuff. If you want to stay in the U.S., it's great. If you want to go back, you have a leg up over other people.
And so let's go back to some of these other issues, because one thing you said is that, hey, every administration who comes in, there's always a priority about funding. So how would you say, once again, you've been in academia for 30, 35 years. Would you say that what's happening under the Trump administration is far more detrimental to universities than previous administrations? And would you say that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, so in terms of determining what gets funded, what are the research priorities? I think we'd all like, in the abstract, we'd all like to say, this is neutral. It's politically neutral. We're just going to fund a study if it's important for the American public to, we're going to cure cancer, or we're going to develop a new material of some sort that will be technologically useful for supercomputers. So we'd like to say it's just objective, and certainly the people that ran these institutes have always said that it's objective. But I think those of us who are in universities understand it's always had a certain political overtone to it. It's been amplifying over time. In the time I've been around, it certainly gets more and more political. My impression is they're more political now than they were under Biden. but my impression is the Biden administration was more political than the first iteration of Trump. So to me, it looks like it's kind of an oscillation that's increasing. I don't think it's a smart or good way to do science, um, but it's hard to know how you unravel it.
Well, you're an economist. I mean, that's your background, and so some of these questions will kind of talk about the economic impact of this. But do you think that many people argue that the things that Trump is doing in the administration, for the economy is kind of it's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a correction, like a correction in the market. He's trying to fix all these things that should have been fixed a long time ago. Do you think that universities that this is kind of a final a fixing of what's happening? It's a correction of the market per se with universities that they become too dependent on the federal government.
So I think there's an element to that. It's kind of a correction. They're in a way they're kind of doing a correction with a sledgehammer. Okay, so it's there's an argument to it and there's a logic to some of these things, but it's being done in a very brute force way. For example, the targeting at the DEI programs. I personally think some universities were racially discriminating, and we see Harvard did its own self study that they released a couple weeks ago, and it's really quite horrifying might be too strong a word, but the stuff they're in their own report came out that they're doing is really something that I don't think we aspire to. It's far short of that. So some of those things needed to be looked at carefully and rethought. As far as the funding goes, you know, the overheads is kind of a strange thing. So tacking on an extra 50% onto the grant. In an ideal world, what you would say is, okay, we're not going to just give that extra 50% to university administrators to play with. We're going to take that 50% and turn it around and give it to another grant. So we'll actually pay for research, actually, rather than overhead. So, there's an argument how that could end up being better. But if they just cut the overhead entirely and they just stop funding research, it could be worse. And so that's where, you don't really know because it's so chaotic right now. We don't really know how this is going to shake out.
Let's talk about DEI. First of all, let's explain to the audience what is DEI? Was it diversity, equity? I don't even. What does DEI
Yeah,
stand for?
exactly. So it stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it essentially it's a bunch of different things. But I think the animating impulse was there's a bunch of different animating impulses. That's why it's so complex to talk about it. But at some level, it has to do with admitting students, hiring faculty, hiring various people, and the idea was to create more diverse communities. And so again, the basic idea is good, is that it'd be nice if when students come to learn at a university, they're exposed to all the different sort of viewpoints and types of people that are out there. The criticism of it is that it went from being kind of diversity to being kind of a monolithic kind of certain ideological point of view, and in extreme versions there would be things like race-specific programs. So the sort of things that would be criticized would be, a university might have a floor in a residence hall that's only for black students. Okay, so people would say, well, we understand, why you might the animus why you might do that, but in a way it looks like segregation in some kind of way, and it looks like discriminatory. So that's the kind of criticisms that would be out there about these programs. And I'm not trying to say they're all of that sort, but I'm trying to articulate where the criticism parts are coming from.
And this DEI. I mean, first of all, 3 years ago, I'd never even heard of the phrase DEI. It's a new thing that's coming about, in my opinion, and maybe I'm just out of touch with what's going on in reality. But DEI it's been a big focus by the Trump administration. Everything from going into websites by the military, others, and trying to, I guess, get rid of things that are too DEI oriented. I guess, as far as inclusion is concerned. But you're a private university, so as a private university, well, let me understand this between private and public. Just help us draw that
Yeah.
distinction for us.
So that's a good thing, especially because other countries use the words differently. So I think, in fact, in the UK they flip the words. Essentially, private schools are actually government schools. I don't know. Here's what it is in the U.S. What we call a public school it's a government operated school. It's funded to some extent by the government. It is a part of the government for all practical purposes. And that would be places like the University of California, the University of Michigan, the University of Florida, University of Alabama, you mentioned. Then there's private universities. Now these are not they're separately incorporated independent entities. They are not part of the government. That would be Harvard. That would be University of Chicago, Stanford, University of Southern California.
But if even though you're a private university, which means you survive based on private funds, it's basically a business, I would
Intuition.
say. Yeah,
Intuition.
intuition, yeah, intuition. But when you start taking federal money, then that makes that you have to adhere to certain rules and guidelines by the federal government, correct? So that's why the federal
Exactly.
government has such, like over Harvard and Yale and these, because they say, hey, I'll take your, I'm a university, I'll take your money, but the government's not saying, okay, you're going to take our money, you now have to be subjected to what we say you can do with it, right? So that's a trade-off, correct?
Exactly right. There's a whole bunch of rules that a private university would not be necessarily affected by. But if you take the federal government, you have to abide by their rules. And Congress has passed a number of rules that prevent a whole bunch of different sorts of things or require different sort of things. It really depends on the administration. Um, we saw, again, under Democratic administrations, especially the last two, Obama and Biden, they were very aggressive in sort of forcing, let's say, more progressive types of rules on universities. Under Trump, they're much more, peeling those back and going in different directions. But exactly right. That's why essentially, since everybody's taking money from the federal government now, everybody has to pretty much listen to what they say.
So what's the future of U.S. education? I mean, what's the impact this is going to have on the quality of education? Is it going to make America less competitive, more competitive with other universities and students around the world?
Well, so universities are doing two things. They're doing research, right? They're creating knowledge and they're educating students. So just in terms of the research part, it really depends what happens with the funding. I think if they keep the amount of funding the same, but they just change the way they dole it out, the university should still continue to be highly innovative. That should support things. If Congress cuts the overall funding level, it's unclear. Now it's not clear. As much as I'm in a university and we like to claim, we do all the time, we claim the high value of the research we do, and certainly a lot of it has really high value. There's pieces of it I'm not sure have high value, as a matter of fact. So if you had to cut, the question is, would you cut the high value stuff or the low value cut, and what would the net effect of that be? So that's in terms of our research mission. In terms of our educational mission, which is why students want to come, to learn. I don't I don't think I don't think this will have a big effect on us one way or the other, as far as I can tell. But it's hard to know. There's so much money at stake. You don't really know how it's going to play out.
Do you think that, from an international standpoint, especially like, we broadcast in Nigeria, Africa, and around the world. I mean, do you think that this, once again, I guess we have to talk about what we hear in the media. You never hear the full story in the media, right? You don't. You always hear, little snippets. And if, just as an outsider, and I'm looking in on this issue, it would, if I was a parent, living in another country, I'd say there's no way that I'm sending my kid to an American school because there's no telling what's going to happen. Everything from whether they're going to be detained or kicked out or whatever.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, that concerns me because there are a lot of great American students, of course, but there's a lot of great foreign students who come in as well. Um, and do you think that we talked about this briefly, but do you think there'll be a chill of any kind? I mean, just your international students. I'm sure
Yeah.
you teach international
Yeah.
students. Are you here? What
Yeah.
are you hearing from them?
There's so many anecdotal horror stories you hear of somebody, our current students who now get stopped at the border. They're flying. They went to a conference. They're coming back in. They're not activists in any way, but they get taken aside and delayed for an hour. So there's a lot more intense stuff going on that makes this country look unfriendly, to other countries. My own view is that I don't think that's where I think that's temporary. I don't think we're going to do that permanently. I don't know where we're going to settle, but this kind of intense scrutiny of things I think will pass eventually. Universities play a very long game, right? Harvard's been around for you know longer than the United States government, right? So universities think in terms of decades and centuries, right? So that of course you have to weather the storm for now, but universities plan to be around 100, 200 years from now. So some of these things you have to deal with, um, but at some level you got to roll with them. Now the one thing I think that is underlying all this that is really serious for universities is that the reason that we're being attacked is, partly partly because politicians, particularly on the right, think that we become partisan actors. They think we're essentially parts of the Democratic establishment, the Democratic Party establishment, in some sense. So partly we're getting hostility from one part of the political spectrum, um, and that may or may not be, you know, as with all things, it's not totally crazy, but it's too extreme to say that too. But the other thing, which is really more concerning to me, is that we know from opinion surveys that just the American public, their trust in universities has gone down quite a bit in the last 10 or 15 years. And if you talk to students, if you talk to parents rather, if you talk to parents, what it is that there's now a good chunk of them who don't really trust us to educate their kids because they don't think we're going to teach them stuff. They think we're here to brainwash them to adopt a certain progressive view of the world, and we're not actually teaching them how to go out and be successful citizens and surviving the economy and flourish and stuff like that. So, you know, I think what I've been saying to my colleagues in universities is that we have to understand why we're losing the trust of the public, because some of the politicians respond to the public. So I think we need to look hard at ourselves and ask, are we doing things, are they just making this up? Are they just fantasizing this, or is there some fire to the smoke, and we're not really rising, we're not really reaching our aspirations of what we want to do. And so I do think we have to think through this issue, because if this goes on for a long time and the public starts to think universities are bad and harmful parts of society, then I think there is a deeper problem.
Well, listen, I agree with you. I mean, America is proud, is their universities are critical to the future of our country, because we are educating the future leaders, the future economic leaders, the future political leaders, the future engineers. And I have several friends who are just now going through this whole thing of finding colleges for their kids, and it's interesting what you just said, because they look at it and say, okay, we don't want our children going to what we consider a more progressive university versus a more conservative universities. It's just like, to me, it's just like the entire polarization of America, where everything has become left and right. Even down to talking about universities these days. And we have to find a way as a country to get more that we're trying to educate us as a whole community, not just as more lefties, more righties, or whatever
Yeah,
it is.
yeah, and our universities are a great source of our strength. I think that we've churned out tons and tons of people who are super informed citizens, and they understand democracy. They know how it works, and they've been super innovative in technology and all kinds of things. I think it's been a huge engine for the country's growth and for the preservation of its liberties to have these people out there. One of the great things that used to be about universities is, and it really is supposed to be our core value, is that we stand for arguing about things. You can come and argue about all kinds of things. We're for open discourse. You can't do that in a corporation, maybe, but here you can say anything, take any position, and argue about anything. And I think that's very healthy for getting ideas, and you need that in a free society. So I think we have a critical role to play, but we can't we can't we in universities can't just assume we do it. We have to keep making sure we are living up to what we think we're trying to do. And I do think that people who are concerned that there may be some instructors that are not really teaching their kids but are trying to brainwash them, they're probably right. Not They're not the majority. Most of the instructors are teaching them useful stuff. But maybe we have some people like that aren't really doing what the deal is, and maybe we should be looking at ourselves too.
No, I agree. And it's a whole nother conversation about tenure and things of this nature that we
Yep,
need to talk
yep,
about, because
yep,
I've never been a
yep,
supporter of tenure, in my opinion. So that's a
yep,
different
yep.
conversation. Well,
But
John, it's always a pleasure to
yep,
see you. I sadly have to go to the next
yep.
conversation. We're talking about the Pope, and the importance of the Pope in the world, if there is an importance of the Pope in the world. But anyway, thanks, John, for your time. I'll
Awesome.
talk to you soon. And
Good to
let's
talk
take
to
a
you,
quick
Dane.
break, and we'll be back in a minute with Around the World with Dane Waters. Thanks.